Hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening to everybody out there, and welcome to What's New in Prisma. I'm Sabin Adams. I'm a developer advocate here, and I'm joined by Nicholas, another developer advocate at Prisma. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Sabin. Good to see you today. Did you enjoy our new countdown video in the beginning?
It was pretty awesome. I like that one a whole lot better. Catchy music.
Yeah.
Too, so.
Exactly. For a long time, we had this short video snippet that said like what's new in Prisma, but it was always a little bit hard to time with the time when we would start the stream, and the countdown is just feels better for that. But we only had this default StreamYard countdown in the past, which is the tool that we're using for these streams. And now we asked our design teams to do a dedicated one for Prisma, and I think that was well worth it. I like it.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's awesome. So yeah, for today, we have a pretty full agenda, but we've got a lot of cool items that we're going to be going through. Just as a quick overview, we're going to be walking through some of the release notes, and we've got a pretty large and exciting release, so that'll be pretty fun to go through. And then we've got a couple of guests, and I won't spoil who we have yet, but we're going to have 2 guests pop on. And then we've just got a couple other little plugs, so we'll be going through those. It should be a pretty full but really fun agenda. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. So I think I'll just go ahead and jump right into the release notes if that sounds good to you, Nico.
Let's do it. It was the 4.0 release this week. So it was the second major release after Prisma 2. About a year ago, we released Prisma 3.0, and now we had another major release pretty much a year later where we ironed out a couple of other things that were on our agenda for a while, but required breaking changes. So that's why we saved all of them until now, where they're finally out.
Yeah, cool. So let's see. I'll get my screen up there.
There's your screen.
And let's bump that font size. How's that font size?
Could use another bump if you ask me.
Okay. There we go.
All right.
Cool. Alrighty. So yeah, like I said, we've got a lot of cool stuff in this release. It's the 4.0 release, and we've bumped the major version because, as Nico mentioned, there are quite a few breaking changes. But I'll go over some resources we have later on to sort of perform those upgrades without running into too many issues. So that should be good.
Quick question, Sabin, because I'm not sure if it's only me or if the people who are watching us also see your screen a little bit distorted. Actually, it looks a little bit strange to me. If people who are watching have the same experience, please drop that in the comments.
You know what? I see it too. That's weird. Oh yeah,
strange boxes on screen. That's weird. If you want, then oh well, now it's good. I think I don't know what happened, but I think now.
Every time I scroll. Yeah, that's weird.
Okay, that's a new one. Yeah, exactly. I think I can share my screen as well. Let me just quickly start screen sharing here. I think the release yesterday actually went smoother than now our streaming about it.
Yeah.
All right. Is my screen up there already? No. But wait, share. I thought I already did. Share screen. Oh no, I still have to close Chrome like last time. I didn't configure it. Okay. Well, what happens if you decrease the font size again? I'm not sure if it was because of the font size or not, or maybe in a different browser if you have Safari.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. All right, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll pop a new browser open.
Sorry, folks.
With us, guys. Technical difficulties.
After 2 years of the pandemic, you would have thought that people figured out screen sharing, but things can always go wrong, I guess.
Yeah, leave it to me. All right, let's see how this goes. If this fixes it, I blame Firefox.
And also, while we are still pulling up the release notes, maybe people on the stream who have seen Prisma Fall already and maybe already were brave enough to start an upgrade process can share a little bit of their experience in the comments if like anyone has has done that yet.
How's that? No.
No.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that's super weird. Okay, why don't you just talk through the release notes?
Yeah.
Just like on a high level, we don't have to show them necessarily. We'll like drop the link. I'll drop the link to that on Slack, on in the comments, and people can scroll over them themselves.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. All right, so let me just find for myself the first one on here. The first couple ones that I'll mention are features that have been around for a little while that have been moved to general availability. And looking at the screen, it looks like after a few seconds, it looks fine. So maybe this will work. So the first one here is extended indexes. So we've got support for a bunch of different new indexes. Specifically, these ones down here, GIN, GIST, SPGIST, and BRIN. Those are really important indexes if you're working with like geographic data and need really specific indexes for specific types of data for performance reasons. So those have been around since 3.5, and they're now in GA. So if you've been using those, you can go ahead and remove that flag. If not, go ahead and give it a try. We'd love to hear any feedback you have on those. And then we have filtered JSON moving to GA. This is a really cool one that a lot of people have wanted, and it's actually been around for a long time. We've had it since May 2021. But again, it's been in GA, and now you can remove that flag. And what this does is it allows you to filter your queries based on data within a JSON field. So that's actually pretty cool. There's a little bit of magic going on down there, as denoted by this wand.
All right, so you can specify the path inside of the JSON object, basically, and then you can add kind of some search criteria as another option to this API, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
nice.
It has some pretty powerful filtering options.
That's super neat. It also reminds me a little bit of another upcoming feature. That's when we will bring type safety to the JSON fields with a similar approach as we have embedded documents in MongoDB with the type keyword. I think something similar is what we have planned for JSON fields on regular SQL databases as well.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting, because then you'll get sort of that like MongoDB type of feel even within a relational database that supports JSON, like Postgres or something. That's going to be really cool. I can't wait to play with those two together. So then we've got improved query raw. So this is another one that's been in preview, and now it's in GA. And what this does is it improves the API we have around our raw queries. And what it does is it deserializes the responses from those queries with the correct JavaScript types. So for example, there were certain types like big ints before that would be returned as just a regular integer or number. And those are now actually returned in the proper big int type. And then there's a bunch of other ones. And I think, we've got this table here that shows what gets deserialized. So if you're curious, head over to the release notes and those will be there. And actually, while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and just post a comment to these release notes in case anyone wants to follow along.
Nice. Yeah, so that feature, I think, will also be really helpful for people that have to drop down to raw SQL every once in a while, right? It's a little bit, or like that's the frustrating part when you have to do this, that it's a lot harder to get type safety for your queries. And I think with this change now, that all the types that you have specified in the database also map to the proper types in your application layer. That's a huge benefit for a lot of people. That will probably make their lives now a lot easier. And I don't want to even imagine the kind of workarounds people have been doing before to achieve this.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely worked in companies where we use an ORM, but there's always a point where you have to drop to raw query at some point. And whenever I've had to do that, it's like, oh no. But yeah, this should definitely alleviate some of that stress and, like you said, work around boilerplate code. So that'll be really cool. Okay, the next feature, this one is a newer feature. It's not one that we've had before, so this is pretty exciting. You can now provide default values for scalar lists. So if you're using a list type, like for example here, we see the string array, you can now provide a default array of strings, and that will populate in the database with this array. And then
Sweet.
a similar type of feature is this improved default support for MongoDB embedded documents. And it says improved, but this is actually a pretty new feature. I don't think we actually supported this before. Is that right, Niko?
Yes, exactly. It's a new feature, not an improved one, because it didn't exist before, as you said. Yeah.
All right. And so what this allows you to do is provide a default value within your embedded document types and for those types. And so these two features, the default for scalar lists and default for embedded document types, I think are going to help a lot with people who have run into this use case and have probably, again, had to use some sort of weird workaround to fill in those default values because they weren't supported before. And then there are a bunch of things in this release. There's a bunch of different sort of enhancements we've made. A lot of them come along with breaking changes, and we'll cover those a little bit later on. So I'll sort of skim through these. We have removed, or actually added, this explicit unique constraint for one-to-one relations. So now when you have a one-to-one relation, the ID that you're linking to is should be unique. And that was always taken care of sort of under the hood and sort of implied, but now we're making it explicit. So when you're scanning through your schema file, you know exactly what's going on. Along the same lines, we've removed this references on implicit M-to-N relations, so many-to-one, or many-to-many, I guess. So before you could define this references ID, but again, that's something that's taken care of sort of under the hood and wasn't really necessary, added some bloat. So we've gone ahead and removed that. Yeah, and then so we have this type keyword, and we're now using that type keyword for defining the MongoDB embedded types. And there was another use for it that was undocumented and unused, so we've removed that. And SQLite protocol now uses a file instead of the SQLite prefix there. And so those are some of the sort of just updates. I skimmed through those quickly, but we'll talk a bit about those later on. These are some more new features coming out. Before, in the past, we've had this reject on not found. So if you do a query with like find unique or something, you can pass reject on not found. And if no record is found, it'll return like an error status. We've deprecated that and moved more to these two functions here, where it will find a unique or throw an error and find first or throw an error. That way it's a little bit more explicit, and it actually returns this record not found type. So you can handle this a little bit more conveniently and in a way that's more reproducible and expected.
Very nice.
And then, yes, there's a couple of other cool features here with rounding in SQLite and null values. So before, with a null value, you would import this db null sort of constant, but now we've actually got a null value, JSON null, and any null object that you pass in. That way it's not using a magic string, because in that case, it actually shows here, you could just create your own magic string that says db null. And if your data happened to actually have that field, then it would cause some weird issues in the Prisma client. So we've now upgraded that to use a more specific and unique object that defines a null value. A lot of this won't really affect anybody because that's a very rare case, but definitely good to know if you have data shaped like that. And I think this is the last piece here that I really wanted to mention, is this renaming of the Prisma SDK to Prisma internals. This is a fun one here because although it's an undocumented API that we have, this SDK, a lot of people who use like generators and stuff are actually taking the initiative to dive in and learn how to use this on their own. I know I've played around with it a bit too. So this has now been renamed to Prisma internals to sort of denote the fact that it is an internal library.
Exactly, with a clear, with a clear intention behind that to like rename, because SDK has this official notion. It sounds like something that developers are supposed to use to build their own kind of workflows, but this is really not what it was supposed to be, right? So now it's renamed internals, hopefully a bit more clear.
Yeah. So if you are using it in any like generator or something, you'll definitely want to switch it to internals. And yes, so that's that. And then, of course, we've got, as usual, a long list of other updates. We have a bunch in this 4.0 release. We saved them up. So if you're curious about any of those, all the links to those are right here. And I think that's going to be it for those changes. I did want to mention one quick thing, though, while I have my screen up. And I think I'm going to have to get the link from Firefox. Here we go. As I'd mentioned going through the release notes, there were a couple of breaking changes. And while we won't really go through the upgrade paths for those in detail on this stream, we are going to have a stream, I think, in 2 weeks. Is that right, Niko?
That's in 2 weeks exactly, or actually 1.5 weeks on July 12th. And that's where I'm going to sit down together with engineers from the engineering team at Prisma and talk through the upgrade process. So if you think that you might be affected by the upgrade process, or you do upgrade and you realize, oh, maybe wasn't such a good idea because everything is breaking and you don't really know how to approach it first, of course, you can already tackle that today by going to our documentation and the upgrade guide that we have there. But in 2 weeks, we are going to host a live stream, kind of a webinar, where we are going to talk through the upgrade process by practical examples. So if you're curious how this process works, then you can just wait one or more 2 weeks and then upgrade after you've watched the webinar. And also make sure to bring your questions to the webinar, as we'll sit down with engineers. They're the best people to really respond to the technical and more involved questions that you might have for this upgrade process.
Yeah, definitely. And then I will also mention, and I'm going to post a link in the Slack here, or in the chat here, that we do have this guide on upgrading to 4.0. I think this covers most of the upgrades that you'll probably run into upgrading to 4.0. So if you can't wait, if you're really excited and you want to get going on it right away, definitely take a look at this and see if this will walk you through your upgrade path.
And by the way, sorry again for the people who joined us a little bit later and you didn't see our initial confusion with the stream. We were aware that there are glitches with the screen share here, but we decided to roll with it, as was already pointed out in the comment by Jesse from MongoDB, who I can see in the comments here, Code Stacker. Nice to have you all.
Yeah. Awesome group of people. I like seeing the chat going, so that's cool. And so next up on the agenda, we have a cool guest that we're going to have on. We've got Chris Burns from Everfund. He's the CEO, and we'll be talking a little bit about what Everfund is and how they're using Prisma. So let's go ahead and get Chris on.
Here we go.
Hey there.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
well.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming. So let's go ahead and just get a little bit of introduction. Let's, if you could share a little bit about who you are, what Everfund is, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. I'm a man of many talents. I run a podcast that I have to plug before my company because Anthony's in the chat, and we just had an episode on with Austin Krim, episode 75, fsjam.org. Give it a listen. As the Prisma plus the podcast plug. But what I do in my day job is that I'm the CEO of Everfund. And what we're doing is lowering the bar for developers to enable nonprofits, help them adapt to digitization, and update them with modern web standards. We also build powerful donation, marketing, operation systems using headless and low-code tools to give back developers control and deliver a whole solution with technology that works for the nonprofit without building from scratch using things like Stripe.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds awesome. And actually, after we had sort of talked about your product a little bit, I was looking around at other offerings out there, and it's amazing that this is seems like such a big feature that people would want, and there's not a whole lot out there. So it's really cool to see you guys sort of like trailblazing that way and getting that working.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, well, a lot of donation providers already are out there, but none of them focus on the Jamstack as a whole. When last year's Jamstack survey happened, 9% of websites built on the Jamstack were non-profit websites, and there's no solution out there that is catered to them.
Nice. So then, so your product then, do you provide like an API to sort of build this on your own, where it's like you put in a script and then you've got your donation box there? Or?
Yes, currently we have built our no-code tools before our headless tools. So we started with our no-code solution. It's a simple JavaScript SDK that can be imported from NPM or installed using a CDN script that gets put onto the website, linked to a listener through a button, and then when clicked, it pops open an overlay. We find this is a really good middle ground for websites that are really quite early in their cycles or real professional websites. As we go forward, we're building our full headless SDK. So we will allow the end developer to control the whole donation flow without having to handle the Stripe requests, the webhooks, and we'll just handle all of that, allowing them to just focus on the front end.
That's awesome. That's great. And that sort of leads me to my question. The technologies you're using, that seems like a pretty complex but really cool problem to solve. So what stack are you using?
Yeah, this goes all the way from an agency project to now my full-time position. When it was an agency project, we started very early with GraphQL back in the day.
Throwback,
and Gatsby. Yeah, throwback, eh? And we have migrated all the way up to Prisma now 3 and 4 coming. And we use Redwood.js as our main tool for our dashboard. And then we use Next.js for our donation gateways.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I don't have a whole lot of experience with GraphQL. How is that transition upgrading through the years up to the newer versions?
It's a really good question. I was actually also curious about this and wanted to ask, because I've heard a lot of war stories about this and a lot of pain from our users, especially I think the transition GraphQL to Prisma 1 and likewise Prisma 1 to Prisma 2. So what was your story there?
Well, I can say my experience with GraphQL is very limited, but it started there. I like some demos, but we built our first full product with Prisma 1. So our original stack was a Prisma 1 Mongo database, Happy server, running on AWS EC2 instances, all Dockerized. And it was great at the time. And this was when Gatsby 2 was also the thing everybody used, no matter if it should be or shouldn't be. Right. And as we went further through our MVP, that's when Prisma 1 got sunsetted for Prisma 2. And also there was a lot of new technologies coming out like Redwood.js that helped us move faster. So we took the jump to move from our previous stack of Gatsby and Prisma 1 all the way to Prisma 2 at the time and Redwood.js. And we migrated all of our data all over.
Oof. So an entire rewrite basically from that former stack, which then had very little to do with the next stack that you've been choosing with Redwood and Prisma 2.
Very much. And the funny thing about it was on Prisma 1, we used MongoDB. And obviously when we joined Prisma 2, it only had SQL support. So we chose Postgres, and then it was like, how are we going to get all this data over? And it was like, Mongo is just like one massive JSON sheet. So we created this like real like hacky script, and then we used Prisma's seed command to just like push all the data over from server to server. It was like some OG stuff.
I'm curious
as
about
long
that.
as it works.
Yeah. Was that pretty difficult to set up? Did it end up being just one long manually written like seed script, or?
Yeah, it was this like really long seed script with like tons of for loops and tons of maps and then inputting the data. And at the time, I probably shouldn't have done it that way, but we were moving fast and I was a single developer and we had to move the data over, and that just seemed like the go-to solution in my head, even if there was a better one.
Mm-hmm. And so you and I actually talked the other day about some of the processes that you're using, and I remember you're using Snaplet. Is that right? Currently?
Yeah, so Snaplet's a really good tool to help your Prisma. So the three tools that I tend to use is Prisma for the ORM, Redwood.js for the GraphQL and function layer, and
Just thought I'd pop this in here.
It's a great one.
Probably for sure. And Snaplet for data migration, data input. And what Snaplet does really simply is it pulls the live data from your database, and then it obfuscates all the things that you want it to do. So that's like people's names, addresses, puts all that fake data in there, and then gives you a database locally to test against. And this was really useful when testing these migrations. So one of the biggest things about Prisma, obviously, is the migration support. And you get into this really nice flow that when you want to build a migration, you build the migration, you see how the data will move around. Normally, you might need to write some custom SQL to see that data move around if it needs to. And then you can test it with that live data. So it's that extra level of confidence knowing that you've tested it with just the database, but then you've also tested it with a data migration on top. And you know when you're going to run that in production, that it will work correctly, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that probably would have been useful then when you were writing that seed script just to test things without touching the actual database, huh?
Probably very much so. Because the funny thing is, you say about that script that I wrote then became our seed script in Prisma.
Oh, wow.
2. We obfuscated the data ourselves, obscured the data ourselves, and then we used it as a seed script. But then when Snaplet came along, we was one of the really early beta customers, and it just made it so much easier to work with. And it's a really, really nice pairing if you use Postgres, Prisma, and Snaplet.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome.
Nice.
Cool. And then another thing I was going to mention is on the chat that we had the other day, we talked sort of about your migration flow and how that's been working. And we were going over squashing migrations. So since then, has that seemed like a good solution after mulling it over a little bit more?
Yes. I find that when you work a lot with migrations, that folder just keeps growing and growing and growing. And when you like making a new database, you know in your head that the last 9 don't really matter because it's just you just want the latest one with the latest schema. So squashing it down into one simple one, I thought is a really good idea. And if it could be automated, so like after every 3, it gets squashed. So you have like this undo. I think that would be a great feature addition to add.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's cool. Great. And I think I had one more question that I wanted to ask you is regarding your production and development environments. You sort of touched on sort of what you're doing there, but that flow, has that been smooth for you? And how are you setting that up?
Yeah, this flow is really easy with Redwood.js. We use Redwood.js's bare metal deployment. So that means it will host the PM2 container for you. It will automatically migrate your database through a script, and it will get that service all running. So it's actually really, really easy. So when you're working in development, obviously you're using all these commands to build their migration files. And then when you test it, you know that it will work with some test data with Snaplet. And then obviously you merge the branch into production. Then with Redwood.js's deployment strategies, I believe most of them do it, but I only use the PM2 deployment. It will you'll run a command, and what it will do, it will pull down the latest Git repository with that merged migration in. Then it will automatically run that Prisma migration. Will eject it if it fails, but normally it works pretty well. And then it will turn on the services, and that will be your whole service deployed. Really, really easy, actually.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. We actually at our Prisma Day, we had a talk from Amy, I think her last name is Dutton. Is that right, Niko?
Yes, Amy Dutton.
Cool. And she talked about Redwood. And so it's cool to see that there are people out there using it in production and really starting to get ramped up with it. That's awesome. And it's cool to see how the ecosystems sort of working together. It's been awesome to watch Prisma sort of get injected into these things like Redwood and Remix. And it's becoming like a tool that a lot of developers are sort of developing an ecosystem around. And it's been really awesome to see that.
Yeah. Redwood and Prisma as a tool go hand in hand in my opinion. Obviously, before Redwood, I was managing Prisma myself, and to me that left a lot of opinions up to myself. Like, do you camel case or do you snake case or do you use train case or whatever? And what Redwood really helps you do is it has a set of opinions out of the box that obviously if you don't like, you can change, but that a lot of them default opinions will really help them lower level to medium level developers get a whole full stack application up and running as fast as possible.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And I would even expand that and say there's lower level and medium level developers who maybe don't know what right opinions are, but there's also even higher level developers that just don't want to think about that stuff. So I think that tool just really helps take that sort of initial planning away from you, and you can just focus on your code. And that's what we all care about at the end of the day, is getting into the product we want to build.
Exactly. And when I started building Everfund, I would have not said that I was as experienced as I am today. And obviously, the choices I made back then, I probably wouldn't make today. But I do know that Prisma would definitely be a choice I would make again.
Oh yeah. It's funny. I was just talking with a buddy of mine yesterday. We were looking through an old code base of mine that had Prisma in it, and I had git blame on. And there was this line of code. I was like, "Oh, who wrote that?" And I looked at it, and it said my name. It's like, oh no. So I definitely have had some of those moments where it's like I've grown, but man, I was at a weird place back then. So tools that helped me make those decisions and write some code would have been great.
Damn you, past Sabin.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm actually curious, now that you've mentioned that, if we could get the chat, post your favorite casing when dealing with databases for fields and tables. I get so much controversy around that. Do you like title casing? Do you like camel casing? I'm curious to see what everybody's using. So, and you were going to say something, Chris?
I was just going to say, when it comes to git blame, who introduced TypeScript to the repository is normally the best git blame you can ask.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I think Anthony is trolling here, but that's all right.
Good job, Anthony.
Well, I believe as default, Redwood.js wants you to do camel case because that's how their generators work. Because that's another really cool feature about Redwood, is that it takes your Prisma file and then you can run a command and it'll automatically create a GraphQL function and all the scaffolding needed to basically get a whole CRUD functionality up and running within like minutes. It's really, really good. And I really think everyone should give it a go if you've not had a chance yet.
Yeah, actually, along those lines, I haven't played with it a whole lot. I've spun up like a starter project, but after watching Amy's talk, I think I'll definitely give it a try. And then I had one more thing I wanted to ask you, and that's regarding Everfund as a whole. So where are you guys in terms of your product? Are you released? Are you getting ready to release? And just how are things going along those lines?
Yeah. As the company, we have a lot of exciting news coming up soon. But up to this point, the company has been all done by two people, one technology person and one business person. So to get as far as we got, I think is truly amazing. But where we're going is obviously a lot more. We've released in the UK, and we are currently setting up our release for the US. We're in early access. So if you're interested in using Everfund, please reach out. We're available, I think, in like 34 countries off the top of my head. And really, we want to work with nonprofits and developers that are interested in using it for their donation systems.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go ahead and post a link in the chat here. So if anyone's interested in checking out Everfund, I was just looking through your docs a little bit and it looks really cool. So definitely give that a look if you're interested in that.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, go ahead.
So I was just gonna say we updated the website today. So if there's any rough edges, you can blame me for that as well.
It looks gorgeous. So I really dig the design here. Cool. And I think unless you have any more questions, Niko, that was really great to have you on, Chris.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I don't have anything else.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us. This was super fun, and I look forward to seeing where Everfund goes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, and I can't wait to listen to the next guest as well.
Cool. Awesome.
All right.
Thanks.
See you, Chris.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. All righty. Next up, we've got Omar here, and he is from cal.com, and we're going to just sort of talk through what's going on over there at Cal. So I think, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. Well, I'm Omar. I'm the lead engineer right now on cal.com. Recently promoted, by the way. I started on September as a freelance, then I started making like pull requests like crazy, and then the CEO here reached out to me and said, "You want a full-time job?" And sure. And now we're here. So
that's the best way of actually trying to get a job in open source. I mean, we spoiled it already that cal.com is an open source company. All your source code is open source. It's freely available on GitHub. So you just started working on the code base, and then you got invited to join the team, basically.
Yeah, it was a funny story because actually we were looking for some Calendly alternatives to maybe self-host, and then the project name was Calend. So we found out, and I started looking into the code base because they were using a stack very similar to the stack that I've been using lately, which was basically TypeScript with Next.js and Prisma, which caught my attention way early on, and I've been trying to use it. And that's what like makes me decide to actually clone the project and try to run it and try to implement some stuff.
That's great to hear. And now I'm curious, when did you hear about Prisma for the first time, and what was your first project with it?
It was like it was like a very organic path that because I used to work like in a development agency before, and we start like testing. We started using Next.js since like version I think 9. So we go a little way back, and at the same time we're start using TypeScript, and we're starting gaining used to from Flow. I think that that's the other type safety for JavaScript that was around. But now we are full on TypeScript. Some of the other tools that we start using start falling short to expectations. So we used to use like SQLize for ORM, but we didn't know if the tables got all columns in the data, if it was on the correct types, and so where's like many any's there, and trying to manually type all the responses. So yeah, we started looking for alternatives, and I think Prisma was recently going into the 2.0, or I'm not sure. But yeah, I didn't find the chance to actually use it until I found cal.com, and yeah, and I started with something simple, right? I was like, it would be cool if I could integrate Stripe till you can get paid bookings, and I make like a pull request for that, and got merged, and yeah, here I am, like
nice.
9 months later.
That's a really cool story, and I think it's funny because at cal.com it's not only the code that is open source, but actually the entire startup is also following this methodology, I think, of what's called an open startup as well. So like maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that is and what that means if people haven't heard about the like this idea of the open startup before.
Yeah. I also wasn't, before joining, I wasn't aware of many of the open startup culture. And now once I read more about it, I fell in love with that, and I don't see myself working for a closed company again. But basically, you can go to cal.com/open, and you can see all the stats of the company, the number of bookings, the employees, where is everybody, salaries, and the monthly revenue. Oh, it's pretty all there, pretty much there. So, and that's like, mm, makes it for a very good company culture, in my opinion, because you're not competing with your teammates. It's like everything is, it's open. You're not like, maybe he's getting paid more than me, or maybe we're making the same amount of work, and why he's getting paid more, or he got a better deal than me, or something like that. So in previous companies, you always have that on the back of your head, and at least from the employee perspective, right? And well, that also you all your investors are on the same page as well, because they can see the metrics, and metrics don't lie, and we can focus on actually getting good quality metrics instead of just trying to argue about something we don't have data for.
That's so cool. I think this entire concept is so fascinating. And yeah, like I hadn't heard about it before I learned about cal.com either. And I looked it up, and yeah, it's a super interesting concept. How many of these open startups actually exist out there? Do you have any idea about that, Omar?
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
Peter will know more about it, but yeah, there's like a bunch of them that I've been looking on commercial open source Twitter account. I think it's COSS, and they post many times any remarkable new companies that are coming up.
Nice. Yeah, I also just found a site which I dropped here in the comments already that lists a couple of more open startups if people are interested in that concept. Awesome. All right. And so you started working at Omar at cal.com, and it was Prisma that drew you to it in a way. But what are the technologies that you're using besides Prisma in your stack? So what does the overall application architecture kind of look like?
Yeah, we're very. I mean, Next.js is like the core, the core of everything we do almost, or even our Open API is just like a Next.js app without the front end, because we were discussing in between using Nest, using Redwood, using other stacks, but since we still trying to move fast to 2.0 that we're planning to launch on September, the learning curve for something more established, it will be okay. We the whole team knows how to use Next.js, so let's try to stick it for now, and then move from there. Also, Prisma is like the second most used stack there. There's also, I heard Chris talking about GraphQL. We don't use GraphQL, but we use like a middle ground between REST and GraphQL. It's called TRPC, made by Alex. It's like a very good. I mean, when a tool clicks with your other tools, it makes total sense to use them. In this case, TRPC is like the glue between the front end and Prisma, because Prisma gives us like type safety, and TRPC preserves that type safety, and moves to the front end. And the cool thing about it, even if you make like 20 calls to the API, TRPC just merges it into a single one and gets
Nice.
all the data, and you prevent like refetching unnecessarily. yeah, it gives you like a lot of control for that.
Nice. Actually, about a year ago, I think we also had the TRPC creator here on an interview, which you can still find on the Prisma YouTube channel. It's about a year ago with the creator, and he's called Alex.
I've got his Twitter link up right now.
Yeah, perfect. And we're also planning to have him on in a future What's New in Prisma episode, by the way, because of course we have this interview from a year ago, but we want to hear what's new in TRPC world as well. So that's why we're going to invite him over in a future episode. And I'm also already looking forward to that. And yeah, if I understood correctly, then what you said, basically TRPC is like the name also stands for remote procedure calls, right? So it's this idea that you're calling a function, and for you as the consumer, it just looks like you're just calling just like a random local function, but under the hood, this is going to be translated into an HTTP request that's sent to some kind of server where it's actually going to be processed. And that's why you can access the database, for example, in these TRPC calls, which might look counterintuitive at first because it only looks like local calls. But like once you know that these calls are executed on the server, then it makes more sense that you're also using Prisma in there.
Yeah, it's like one endpoint to rule them all. Kind of like GraphQL. You don't get like the same granularity of choosing exactly which properties to fetch. But like I said, it's like a better middle ground between a fully REST and a fully GraphQL. So it's a very nice developer experience.
Totally. And I think your code is also structured in a monorepo, right? I think I looked at this, and that was like something else that I stumbled upon. How is that going overall? Like structuring your code as this monorepo? Like, are you sharing libraries? How does all of that work?
Yeah, on the beginning of the year, I took the task to migrate to a monorepo structure. We ended up using Turbo Repo, which it's great. It has still like a pretty new technology and a learning curve compared to Lerna or on some others who has more maybe articles about them. But since we are on Vercel as well, so it made sense to try to stick to Turbo Repo so we can benefit from deployments as well. But yeah, the code structure basically is split into apps and packages. And in apps, we have our documentation, we have the main web app. We also made some things. There are some private repos that are part of the monorepo as well, like the website and some proof of concepts that we're working on that are not ready to be public, but we're actually working to in thinking into making open source of them as well. Um, but all these applications reuse many shared logic. In one of them is Prisma. So instead of using Prisma directly on the web application, I extracted to a Prisma package. So instead of importing from at Prisma client, we import it from Qualcomm Prisma package. So before we have the Prisma, we have the Prisma schema on the web app, and we have the same Prisma schema on the website. And we made changes to one schema, we have to make it to the other one and run migrations here and run migrations there. So with the monorepo, we extracted to one package, and we only have to worry for one schema and one migrations, and everyone just consumes. So it's kind of tricky to keep them in sync sometimes, but the benefit it's way better than having to handle separate private repos and the public one. So it's been quite a learning experience.
Nice. Yeah. So my last question actually now is you mentioned that you're using Next.js, and at least I think it was the dashboard you said or something like this where you're only using Next.js API routes. In these API routes, which if you're using Vercel for deployment will be deployed to Lambda functions on AWS infrastructure, actually, as far as I know. Have you, or like, are you using a proxy server for connection pooling between your database and those serverless functions, or has that never been a problem for you because you like never were in a situation where you were about to maybe exhaust your database connection limit or anything like that?
Yeah, we're actually on the edge to we're looking into using the data proxy from you guys. The only thing keeping us from opting it is, I think we cannot use interactive transactions yet with it.
Right.
So
Still
that's
a
the only
limitation
thing
with the
holding
data
us back.
proxy. Interesting.
Um,
But like on a more general like note there, have you seen any problems with that setup at all, or like was it not problematic so that you like didn't even have the need for such a proxy server, like whether it's the data proxy or PG Bouncer or some other tool that would do this?
I mean, we try to stick to the same tools as much as possible. We don't like also to be all scattered around. And also the thing is, any technology stack decision that we've made is gonna affect all the self-hosted users. So we cannot just add stuff, and expect everyone to just keep up the pace, right? So
That's a really good point, actually, that you have to take that always into consideration just when you change your data model, that everybody who's using cal.com will have to run through a migration because of that, right? So you really want to think twice what you're changing.
And even myself, sometimes I forget, okay, I can just make this big change, and then it hit me, okay, I forgot about self-hosted, and it's going to be a pain point for them as well. So we try to be a little more strategic with these changes. And at the beginning, I think when I first stumbled with data proxy from Prisma, we have to change the generator script. Now I see that you can just pass like an environment variable, and that works for us because we can use data proxy ourselves, but we don't force everyone else to use it as well. So they can adopt it incrementally as well if they want. For all self-hosted users. But yeah, we are working towards to use the proxy in the near future, because we are already seeing not many, but very little timeout error sometimes from connection pools, and we're reaching to that point when we're going to start needing something like that.
Interesting. Super cool. Thank you so much for giving us that rundown of the stack at cal.com. That was really insightful, Omar. And unless anybody else has any closing remarks, I think we can let you go.
All right. I don't have anything, but it was really nice to listen to this chat with you, Omar. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.
All right. Bye. Have a great day.
See ya.
All right.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, both of those two people that we had on are just really cool community members in Prisma, and it was great to be able to have some chats with them.
Yes, and we had some funny conversations also going on in the comments. Initially, I wasn't sure if maybe James was trolling here, but he did clarify himself that he was talking about the Prisma integration. And yes, that has been launched for production a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure if we wanted to get the database wars in our comments here today.
So we did actually, during that chat, we had a question from someone named Muhammad about migrations. He was running a migration, and it sounds like it was asking about deleting some production data. Do you have any insight onto when that might occur, Niko?
Yes. Let's talk about this, because this is actually a question that gets brought up over and over by community members. And to be fair, the workflow that we have there is not ideal. One thing that I can reassure everybody of, though, is that the situation is not quite as described here by Muhammad, we're not dropping any production data ever. So we have two commands that apply migrations against your database schema. These are Prisma migrate def and Prisma migrate deploy. Prisma migrate def is the one that you're supposed to use in development, and Prisma migrate deploy is the one that you're supposed to use when you deploy your app to a production environment. With Prisma migrate def, developers will often indeed run into the situation where Prisma migrate def is asking them to reset their database, even though it's not always fully clear why it needs to do so. And to be fair, this is just unfortunately a limitation, a constraint at the moment, that we designed Prisma migrate def with the assumption that in development, you can always easily throw away the current state of your database. And we already realized that this is not ideal. In fact, the schema team at Prisma, the one that's responsible for Prisma migrate, they already caught on to this, and they're planning to look into the Prisma migrate workflows overall and improve the situation there, so that you won't always be asked to drop a certain column or table or delete any kind of data when you're running this command, when it's not obvious why it would be needed. So that's as much as I can say about this. It is on our radar. I'm not sure if we have a dedicated GitHub issue for this already. If not, then always feel free to go to our GitHub, describe the situation there and what you don't like about it, and then ideally also kind of suggest a solution that like maybe our product team can then adopt and hand over to our engineers to implement. But yeah, it's not deleting production data. So even if you get these warnings in development, you don't have to worry. With Prisma migrate deploy, no production data is going to be deleted.
Awesome. Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Niko. And then I don't think I saw any other questions, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next piece, and that's talking about Prisma Day. That was really exciting. So yeah, let's just do a little recap there.
Yeah, so summer has arrived in Berlin. This week was actually the hottest day of the year, I think, so far. On Monday, it went up to 35 degrees Celsius. And 2 weeks ago, where it was already similar, where we already had similar temperatures, we hosted Prisma Day here in Berlin in a beer garden in an outside location, which was really nice, actually. I really enjoyed that setting for a conference because it made everything so relaxed and so casual. And it was a really great in-person experience. For me personally also, it was the first in-person conference after the pandemic, actually. So for the past 2 years, I didn't attend any conferences. So that was also really nice. And yeah, overall, I had a great day. Did you actually follow the stream throughout the day, Sabin? I think we had a live stream up on YouTube. Like, were you there and watched remotely?
So I followed bits and pieces of it. Yeah. Nice. I didn't get to see the whole thing. I didn't sit down for 8 hours, which was unfortunate, but I did get to see it. And I went afterwards and watched all the talks, and there was a lot of good stuff.
Nice. Yeah. And I think that's what we want to do to wrap up today's show, actually talk a little bit about our favorite talks and maybe some takeaways that we had from them. And yeah, we can just like take rounds, I think, and I can start. So the first talk that I really liked was the one from Michael Hayes about Pothos and type-safe GraphQL server development with Pothos and Prisma. Some of you who have been around a little bit longer might have seen Michael actually on a former What's New in Prisma episode just 2 or 3 months ago. So actually not that long ago. You can go back on our YouTube channel and find that to see how he talked about Pothos here on the stream. Or you go to the YouTube channel and check out his Prisma Day talk, where he did all of that in another 20 minutes. And I think he gave a very polished and nice talk with a lot of good code examples that gave you a good understanding of how Pothos works to create your GraphQL schema. And it was actually fascinating also to hear a little bit about the origin story of Pothos, because like Michael shared that he started building it as he was working at I think it was Airbnb, and Pothos is also used at other companies like Netflix. It's used there inside of internal tools, so it's really built for like scalable like GraphQL APIs that really see a lot of load as well. it's a code first schema library, right? It's kind of similar to Nexus or Type GraphQL in that way, where when you're building a GraphQL API, you don't define your schema and your resolver separately, but instead you do all of this in code, and that's what's called the code first approach. And then the last thing that I really liked about Pothos that he pointed out in his talk was the rich plugin system. That it's really extensible and flexible, and there are plugins already for authorization, for logging, so for a lot of things that otherwise or like a lot of these kind of functionalities that you would want in your application, but where it's kind of cumbersome to build these yourself. And there it's just kind of off the shelf. You can install these NPM packages inside of your GraphQL server, and then you get access to these plugins as well to easily enhance the functionality of your GraphQL server. Yeah, that was my first talk that I enjoyed. I have the link to the entire YouTube playlist with all Prisma Day talks open. So people can go there for a full list of all the talks.
Yeah, and just to add on to a little bit what you said about about Pothos in general, I am working on a series right now where you'll be able to build a full stack type safe application, and we're going to be using Pothos pretty extensively on the GraphQL API side. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out, and if you want to learn a little bit about Pothos and see it in action, that'll be on there.
Nice.
And then I guess I'll go ahead and take a turn. There was a talk that Jesse Hall gave called Thinking Like a Document, and I think he's actually in the chat. So kudos to you, Jesse Hall. That was a really awesome talk. I actually spent some time this month at MongoDB World, and I got to talk to a lot of people working with MongoDB and specifically around like data modeling within Prisma. And a lot of people have a little bit of trouble understanding how they might model their data and what sort of the best practices are. And I think this talk was really great because it went over some of the basics of modeling relations within a document store. And actually, Jesse calls it a non-tabular database because that seems to be the most appropriate name for it, because schemaless isn't necessarily the greatest name for how MongoDB structures its data, because no matter what you're working with, you're always going to have some sort of schema. There's going to be some sort of shape to your data. So I really liked how he put that as non-tabular. But yeah, it was a great talk because it sort of goes into how to model relations and when you might use embedded relations. So within MongoDB, you can have an array of objects. And oftentimes that's a great way to store relational data, stored all in one place, because if you are going to be querying data together, it's great to store it together. And then he also talks a little bit about when you might want to break that out into multiple collections and do more of like a foreign key type of lookup on that data. So I think that was really great. That I definitely, for me, cleared up a lot of confusion I had and just concerns about maybe writing performant queries and performant data structures in Mongo. So if you're in the same boat as I was, definitely give that talk a look. It should be in the playlist that Niko posted.
Yes, you can find it there. I'll move on with with another talk that I really liked, and that was the one about Redwood from I think Amy Dutton, right? Yeah, she gave the talk about Redwood. It was a great talk. I really enjoyed it. She talked about all the different components of Redwood. So it comes with GraphQL, like out of the box. It uses React on the front end, and it really has a lot of these features. And at like some point, she said something what like really resonated with me. It was basically that like Redwood combines all of the tools that she would be using anyways if she was to build a full stack application, but it just bundles them together so that for you as the consumer of all of these tools, you can save all the plumbing, and it just kind of works out of the box. You just see Redwood as the consumer of this, and you interact with Redwood APIs, and under the hood, Redwood makes sure that all the tools are properly integrated. So that sounded super neat, and yeah, it's just another testament, I think, to how awesome Redwood is, that yeah, we saw this great talk.
Yeah, definitely. And just Redwood in general has gotten me pretty excited. And I think Amy mentioned it in her talk. that it's sort of like the Ruby on Rails of JavaScript now. I know a lot of the people who are working on Redwood were deep in the Ruby sort of ecosystem there. And so we're getting that power of just like composable pieces, putting them all together into one framework. And I think that's really awesome.
Right.
Yeah, and then the next one I have is actually your talk, Niko. That one got me really excited, of course. As a Prisma employee, Niko talked about the future of Prisma, where we're going, upcoming features that'll be coming in the next 3 to 6 months, roughly. That's sort of the roadmap we have right now. And there's a couple of features I wanted to point out that got me really excited. The first one is query analytics. And I think, was it Spiros who gave a quick demo of what that looks like?
Yes, exactly. I kind of did a fake interview with him where he recorded 3 different short videos for me. And we discussed what kind of questions he should be answering. And then I asked these questions on stage and just played the videos, which were embedded in the slides. And well, I mean, from my perspective, I think it was very obvious that it wasn't a real interview. I think you saw the play button rendered on top of the thumbnail before it was playing. But apparently there were some people in the audience that had been wondering whether Spiros is actually now live, live with me there and answering my questions. So that made me happy that there was some effect and at least sparked some confusion among the audience.
I'm very, very glad you said that, because I was just about to embarrass myself and say there were 3 videos of Spiros, and it took me 2 whole videos to realize that it wasn't live. So for the first 2, I thought he was actually talking live, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. But yeah, so I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Initially, we actually had planned to mess with the audience even more by him having a different outfit in every video, or putting on a cap or sunglasses, something like this. But it didn't get that far, unfortunately. Actually, I think that would have been fun.
That would have been awesome, yeah, for sure. But that whole demo that he gave got me really excited. The way you can actually drill down so deep into the different queries, even through transactions, and look at individual queries and look at the performance. That part was amazing. But what really got me was, once you drill down into a specific query, you can actually rewrite it on the spot there through the editor and rerun it, and it'll tell you how much faster it is than the previous version.
Yeah, exactly. I think he showed that example of a slow find many query, and then he started optimizing it right on the fly inside of the query console with just a pagination argument, and then he could see the effect that this small change had right there in the UI. So I think it's going to be a really, really useful tool for everybody who's seeking to kind of optimize their database queries.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's going to be available through the data platform, is that right?
Yes, exactly. That's the next feature that we're going to work on. And I think Spiros' team is already in the phase where they start implementing this now.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. So that got me really excited. And then, of course, multi-schema querying. That's a very sought after feature in Prisma. There's a huge GitHub issue where people have been discussing it for a while. And it's something that I've played around with, trying to build a workaround for myself to be able to do this. So seeing it on the roadmap and seeing it coming up so quickly has me pretty excited. And if you aren't aware of what that is, with databases like Postgres or Microsoft SQL, you can set up schemas within your database. And within those schemas is where you set up your tables and columns. And a lot of organizations, especially larger organizations with tons and tons of different tables, they like to organize their tables into different schemas. Like an auth schema, maybe an events schema where you have all your event data, stuff like that. So this will allow you to use Prisma to query across those schemas, whereas right now you're limited to a single schema, just the default one that comes with the database. So that should be a really useful feature, especially for, like I said, maybe larger companies or people with larger databases who've organized it in a more granular way. I think that'll be really cool. But that one's got me pretty excited.
And what did you think about the Prisma client extensions?
Yes, that is also super cool. There's so many use cases where I've developed workarounds to do specific things, so many different things. I won't even bother mentioning the specific ones, but this extensions feature is going to allow you to tap into the Prisma API sort of and apply your own business logic or maybe shared functions that you might want to use. And that's
it's a little bit,
useful.
Yeah, it's a little bit like middleware, but actually type safe, right? So everything that you'll be doing inside of this when you want to kind of modify maybe an existing Prisma client operation, such as find many, you want to like make sure that you always exclude certain fields from the results or something like this. Now it's going to be type safe, where you could achieve this beforehand already through middleware. But like with middleware, you always had the problem that on the receiving end of placing a Prisma client call, you wouldn't actually know what kind of data is being returned if you had excluded fields or computed fields in there. Like that was the example I gave in the talk. But yeah, it's going to enable so much more. Also these custom model methods. So it's not only that you customize the existing model methods, but you can also just create your own model methods and also your own top level methods. So I think it's going to make Prisma a lot more flexible. And then the most exciting thing about this, and I also pointed this out in the talk, is that it's going to be another extension point where developers can build their own functionality, their own NPM packages that then can be shared with a wider Prisma community, and people can start using the functionality that other people build as extensions. So it's kind of like an extension, like you could picture an extension marketplace in the future where you have the most popular Prisma client extensions for various use cases, and people can just install them inside of their applications. So that's really, really nice, I think. And yeah, it's another extension mechanism on top of the two that we already have, which are generators in the Prisma schema and middleware packages. So that's already where people, where developers can contribute to the Prisma ecosystem with their own NPM packages.
Yeah, and there's so many use cases I could think of for this, and actually one that comes to mind right now because I was just chatting with someone about it. Manuel was looking for a solution for like DTO generators with Prisma, so DTO style interactions. Specifically with these extensions, this would allow you to add your own custom functions to your models, where you might be able to implement some sort of DTO style interactions with your models. So I'm excited to see what the community comes up with along those lines. That'd be really cool.
Yes. And as the last talk, I just quickly wanted to mention, because we cannot wrap this up without it, of course, the keynote that Søren gave, our founder, where he announced the Prisma data platform for production. So that was also super exciting to see that talk happen right at the beginning of the conference to open the day.
Definitely, yeah. And then speaking of talks, I know we're getting pretty far on time, but I definitely want to mention this. Next week on July 6th, I think the date is. Yeah, July 6th, we're going to be having a Prisma meetup with CockroachDB, where we'll have a couple of cool talks. And I'm actually going to be on doing like a co-talk with Adrian Howard over at CockroachDB. And we're going to be walking through some of the cool features of Prisma, Cockroach, and then how to integrate those together in the best way, specifically focusing on working in serverless environments and how to manage all of that. So definitely tune into that. We're going to have links and I'll be tweeting about it for sure. So yeah, definitely give that a look if you're interested in how those two work together.
That sounds awesome. All right, there were a few comments in the chat, and you already mentioned the question from Manuel about DTOs. And I think you already also shared as a response that there is a community built DTO generator for Nest.js, which I think I did follow the conversation here, where like Manuel wasn't super happy with how that DTO generator actually worked, if I read that correctly. If you have any questions about this, then always feel free to drop them in our GitHub discussions. That's where we can take a lot of time to actually like review your question and make sure that we're able to help you. It's a bit of a better context than here on the stream necessarily. But at this opportunity, I also wanted to drop the Nest.js tutorial that we have recently published on our blog, where also it's explained how you can work with DTOs when using Prisma. And then Manuel has another question, and that is, has Prisma considered creating a JavaScript framework? And okay, I know we're getting like close on time anyways, or actually we don't, because this stream doesn't have a determined length, so whatever.
Oh, okay.
In fact, when we built the first version of Prisma 2, we still considered it to be a GraphQL tool, basically, that we wanted people to use to build GraphQL APIs and solve their database workflows with it. So kind of like a GraphQL ORM, something like this. And at that point, we wanted that people use a certain stack that we would control. So we were close to building a JavaScript framework, as Manuel is asking here. And for the ones that remember, we actually at the time tried to do that with Nexus. So for a while, we had this idea of the Nexus framework floating around, and have been working on it actually. But we did realize after a while that this is not the right path for us, because really we're focusing on building a great ORM that works well with all the databases that we support and with all the technology stacks that developers already use and love. We didn't want to prescribe or dictate to any developers what they should be using in the end. So we kind of adjusted our strategy there a little bit, which, and Chris, I mean, you talked about, so I see you in the comments, Chris, like you talked about how you went from GraphQL to Prisma 1 to Prisma 2, and you underwent all these changes. So of course, you remember the Nexus framework along the way here as well. Yeah, that was like something where we invested in like for a while, but then, and this is something that we really could have handled better as well in terms of communication. We kind of dropped the ball a little bit on Nexus, and it's still something where we are trying to help people. But now there are a lot of alternatives emerging that help you go from your Prisma models to a GraphQL API fairly quickly. Like Pothos is one of them. There's another really exciting one that's called Noun and Verb. We'll actually have the creator on in one of the future What's New in Prisma episodes as well. I'm very much looking forward to that already. But yeah, there are other solutions to this now. But that was a long rant, Manuel, just to say that no, we're not considering creating a JavaScript framework. That's not our business. We are building a great ORM that should work with all the existing frameworks out there. And we don't want to spend energy building our own JS framework and also convincing other people to use that.
Right. Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Prisma, the ideology around it is sort of that we're a building block where you might build your own internal processes on top of us. And
exactly.
So
it's more like
that.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's more like a primitive that you're including in like inside of your application that indeed you can build upon then.
Right. Yeah, and a powerful one too, as we've seen with the community generators and just so many different libraries out there. There's so much extensibility, and with the new extensions feature, that's just going to skyrocket, I think.
Yeah. All right, Sabin. I think.
Yeah.
Do we have anything else on the agenda for today? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we talked about all of our points and more. So I think this was a really good stream, a lot of fun, and it was great to have some interaction in the chat and be able to talk with you guys. I keep it coming in the future. What's new in Prismas? I love to be able to comment on here and just interact with you guys.
Totally. All right, then see you all in 3 weeks.
Cool. See you guys.
Bye bye.